everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this National Young Writers Festival 2020 talk, The Right Business, How to Secure a Book Deal. The Right Business stream of NYWF 2020 is funded by Foundation for Rural and Regional Renewal, ABC Haywire Conquer Every Opportunity grant to provide young writers with the skills they need to turn their writing passion into a business. My name is Allee Richards. I'm a fiction writer. My debut novel is due to be published next year by Hachette Australia, and I'm speaking to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Also on this talk with me is Grace Heifetz, literary agent at Left Bank Literary.
Hi, and I'm coming to you from Gadigal of the Eora Nation.
And Robert Watkins, publisher at Hachette Australia.
Hi everyone, I'm also coming to you from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Thank you so much for joining me, guys.
Hey.
To talk about...
Anytime.
So as I mentioned before, my novel will be published next year. It's called In Real Life. So I thought before I ask you any questions that emerging writers might have about getting a book deal, I would just kind of quickly talk about my book and how we all came to be here together. So In Real Life is a literary fiction realist novel about a young woman who has a one-night stand and falls pregnant, and then soon after that she finds out that the man that is the father of the child has taken his own life, and she decides to kill the baby. And before I worked on my novel, I started out writing and publishing short fiction. And I, like most writers, had a long time of getting rejected, and then I started getting published. And I actually had a funny memory when I was thinking about this the other day that I thought was appropriate to mention, because it was with Josh Pomari, also known as JP Pomari, who now coincidentally is another Hachette author. But he and I were published alongside each other in the final print edition of Kill Your Darlings, and we did a talk. We did like a reading at an event that they did, and we met there and we were chatting, and this is before he signed with Hachette. And he said to me, "Oh, you should get a website, because when you get a website, then when you publish things, publishers will email you and ask if you're writing a book." And I was like, "Oh, cool, I'll do that then." And I did, and people emailed me, but massive difference between Josh and I this time is that he actually had a draft of Call Me Evie, and I didn't have it.
Kind of essential.
Yeah, it's good to be prepared.
So, people would email me and I would be like, "No, but cool." And, so that was in 2017, and I think, I submitted In Real Life to you in 2019. So the 2 years between that, I had been in contact with publishers at various times, and sometimes I had coffees with them and stuff and talked about my work. And it was all really exciting, and I probably gained some information about it. But I actually think now I probably just wasted some people's time. It was maybe not. I don't know if I would do that again. So I think if you do have a full draft of a manuscript, it's good to have a website. But maybe if you don't need to be chatting to publishers so much. But yeah, so then the way that I met you two was pretty normal. I submitted the first 3 chapters of In Real Life to the Richell Prize in 2019, and was shortlisted, and met Robert at the event there last year. And then not long after that, it was shortlisted for the Victorian Premier's Unpublished Manuscript Prize. And I'd had a lot of time over then to think about whether or not I wanted to get an agent, and I decided I did. And someone else recommended Grace to me, so I just emailed via the Left Bank submission form. And now here we all are.
And I jumped in. I know. I remember seeing that email come up, and it was very exciting. And it was just actually, I think it was just before the Vic Prems was announced as well. It was like a week before.
Yeah, I think I emailed you when it wasn't announced, but I'd found out.
Yeah. And you didn't. No spoilers. You didn't tell me anything. Just for the record.
And then we actually, originally when we spoke, we thought that we might speak to lots of publishers and meet with lots of different people and look at all my different options. And then we met with Robert, and the offer you gave to publish in real life was just so great. I couldn't say no. And I didn't with anyone else in the end.
Yeah, didn't need to see anybody else, just you.
No.
That's how I like it always to be.
It's interesting, actually. I think when I was reflecting on this, the real difference between when I met you compared to when I had spoken to other publishers before is there's sort of like two. Grace, you might have more insight into this because you've sat in a lot more pitch kind of meetings than I have. But there's sort of two approaches, and one is we are such a good publisher that you would be so lucky to publish with us. But then I felt like your pitch, Robert, was you are such a good writer that we would be so lucky to publish you. And I think that, you know, people, just the flattery.
I mean, I think this is something that maybe writers don't realise, is that publishers need great creators to exist. So, you know, there's many things publishers do well, but the reality is they're reliant on someone coming up with a really great story to be able to make a book in the first place. So I don't think that me saying that was actually revolutionary. I think it's actually just kind of true, like that, you know, whenever it comes to publishing, we need fabulous creators to work with. So we are kind of privileged to be able to work with them and bring that thing into the world. And I'd like to think that even though my colleagues might want to big up the place that they work, I think they probably feel the same way. They just may not have communicated it quite as nicely.
And I think that's one of the things about, you know, if you are in a position where you can meet lots of publishers, I think what you'll find is that it's a really friendly, collegiate industry. You know, like I mean, obviously I'm slightly biased, but I'd like to think that, you know, we're all a pretty good bunch. And essentially, and, you know, publishers all do the same thing, right? But it is, what sets it apart is obviously that personal relationship that you build with your publisher, and having the opportunity to meet lots of publishers can sometimes mean that, yeah, you click with some, you don't click with others. It's like, you know, it's like finding a therapist. It's like, you know, it's one of those things that you do have to, so much of the time, really trust your gut. But also it's perfect when you meet the publisher and it's just one, but he's the right one, or she. So in this case, Robert.
I mean, it's probably, like, I am pretty amazing, but
So, I mean, I guess there's so many different ways that people do end up getting published. So I thought, instead of asking maybe your straight advice to people who want to be published, I thought I might ask you what are some things that you would tell people not to do? Are there any don't do rules?
What not to do? I think, as far as just coming from an agent perspective, I think it's really important to like do your research, like read acknowledgements. If you've read you know, a book and, you know, you really like the author and you really feel like that could kind of fit, read the acknowledgements, because often, you know, they'll thank their publisher, they'll thank their agent. So it gives you a little insight into who represents what. You know, we all have websites. You know, look at who we represent. We have bios. Like, just do your research. And look, I remember when I was at Curtis Brown, and for years we used to sit in a room with our submissions, you know, when it was like hard copy back in the olden days, and so many of the letters were sent to Dear Mr. Curtis Brown. And there's not one man in that office. Well, there is now, but at the time there was none. And there's certainly no Mr. Curtis Brown. So just things like that, you know, I just think if you're going to take the time, you've spent so much time writing a book, spend, you know, half an hour to an hour, like researching who you think, you know, it would sit best with, because it does make a difference, I think. Especially, you know, when they mention other writers on their list. You know, I had someone recently email me, and I had an intro and they mentioned you, Allie. So, you know, it's like I could automatically just, you know, it just gave me a real taste for, you know, what I was potentially looking at. And it also said to me that that person was, you know, they knew their stuff. They read. And I think that is also one of the most important things is, yeah, if you're a writer, you really have to read. And that seems so basic, but I have spoken to quite a number of writers in the past, and, you know, they don't read a lot because they don't like it to sort of potentially infiltrate, or they also don't read a lot of Australian writers. And I think that is such an important thing to do is, you know, this is your market, this is your home market. Know what is out there.
I think so much of what I think about when it comes to like approaching publishers or being interested in getting somebody to read your work is actually just about like professional courtesy and kindness. It sounds a little silly and probably kind of obvious, but you know, so much of it is about like recognizing that publishers and agents and anybody who's commissioning work is a normal human being with an actual job and probably quite a big workload, because it might surprise you all to know that we don't necessarily do all of our reading within like normal work hours, because we're probably doing something else at that time related to a book's publication. You know, countless video conferences and meetings and, you know, working on various aspects of a publication, which isn't necessarily just reading and editing and acquiring. So I guess the thing I'm saying about professional courtesy and kindness is, you know, if you submit something to someone or you query someone or you reach out to somebody and they don't get back to you quickly, or they don't come back to you with a response that you're expecting, I think you often need to step back and think about what else might be going on for that person. Something that I get asked a lot is, you know, like, how soon can I expect to get a response for something that you never asked to read? And the answer is probably, you know, how long is a piece of string? Like, I can't guarantee you that sending me something that I haven't asked for means that I'm going to read that thing within any decent period of time, because at any given moment I could be sitting on 15 other submissions, be from authors I've worked with before, or from agents that I've worked with before that I respect, or from a prize that I've been judging. So, you know, at the end of the day, like, the amount of time and energy that I have to respond or read work is limited. So I guess it's just about that. It's about being professional. It's about being kind. You know, being too familiar or being too aggressive is really unlikely to get somebody to kind of pay any attention to you. So I think, you know, think about how you would deal with somebody in a professional context elsewhere and how you would like to be dealt with. And that's probably going to be a really good starting point.
That's so true.
So publishing fiction is a really, really long and slow process, which when I first started publishing short stories, that surprised me. Like, all those journals, all the Australian literary journals say they take 3 months to get back to you about a submission, but most of them take a year from the ones that I've published with. And then it's still like another few months until the journal's out. And it took me a bit of getting used to, I think, when I started writing, was just realising how slow you might write something and then 2 years later it's published. But then even when I find you again, I learned the lesson again. I was like, oh, okay, this is like, I'm not just going to get my structural edit tomorrow. It's going to come in like 6 months, and it is just a really long game.
It is. I think, I mean, and Robert can speak to like the actual production of a book and all the ins and outs and what needs to happen, the mechanics of what happens behind the scene. And that the longer it takes is actually, you know, potentially a lot better for the author, because it means it's building in-house and you get everybody on board, and then you have to get booksellers, and then, you know, so there is a step. But Robert, I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I have a very particular point of view on, you know, what's important in publishing fiction, and I often would lean towards taking longer to produce a book than speeding it into the market, and that's probably because I think that I'd like to give an author every chance to reach their best potential, I guess, or their fullest potential with the work that they're producing. So I think, the longer you take and the more considered you are with your edits, and the longer you take and the more considered you are with designing what that book is going to look like, and the longer you take and the more considered you are when you're putting together how you're going to market and sell that book and introduce that author to the world, particularly if they're a debut. All of those things are only good for setting somebody up for having a really solid start to their career. I think that rushing things out means that you don't get to take your time and really think through how you're going to do that. So, I mean, my preference for literary fiction is for it to take at least 15 to 18 months after acquiring the work to publish it, which sounds like a really long time, but if you think about when we acquired In Real Life, Allee, we're kind of halfway there now. The time goes really fast.
Yeah, it does.
Because there's always
maybe
something
not in a pandemic, but
I mean, this year's probably been a bit trickier than others, but the reality is I'm sure it probably sounded like a really long time from the outset, but once you get to kind of halfway through, you can see why it takes so long, because it means that you have an opportunity to really kind of consider what you're doing with the book when we've given you some feedback. And also that when we're working on it again, that we're going to be taking our time and not kind of just speeding up for the sake of it. So, there's a lot that goes into making a book, and I believe that the longer you take, or at least the more considered you are, then the better that is for the author at the other end, because then they can be assured that they feel really comfortable with or are very proud of the work that they're producing.
Yeah, and it's a really crowded market, and you need to have that time to really build and grow, particularly literary debuts. You really want that space and time to get booksellers reading and to get people excited and to build that momentum.
Yeah, I think on the craft side of it as well, I've been really grateful to have so much time. I'm about to hand in my structural edit. I think the due date's in 2 weeks. And it's been good because each time I've gone through it start to end, I've actually had enough time, because I've had 3 months. I've had enough time to put it down for a week or even 2 before I go through it again. So it's given me mental space. And then I know it'll be another few months before I get to copy edit. So I'm coming to it fresh. And it just really helps, and it's made it a really enjoyable and not stressful experience.
Yeah, that's the last thing you want for it to be, right? And yeah, like we were saying at the beginning, when you've already spent all this time writing this work, and then getting an agent to read takes time, and then figuring out the strategy of submitting and all those things, it does take time. And so by the time you get it in front of a publisher and you've got a deal, you're like, okay, let's get this going. But we're doing it to give it the best shot. Absolutely.
Yeah, the only negative I can think of, and I think that it probably doesn't even count because it's just in my head, but every time I see a book, I keep thinking that that's my book. It's like, and I'm like, oh no,
I don't think you're alone in that. I think there's always that stress, right?
Can I ask you a question, Allee?
Yeah.
So you had obviously been working away at writing pieces and before you entered the Richell Prize and before you got listed for the BPLAs. How many times have you tried to interact with a publisher, and what kind of outcomes had you had before that all happened?
I couldn't tell you how many, but I think because I was publishing short stories for so long, I'd spoken to maybe 5 or 6 before.
Which is a lot.
Of it. Yeah, that is a lot. Because originally I wanted to publish a short story collection. And everyone pretty much said the exact same thing, which was that you are a very talented writer and I will read your novel when it's finished. Variations on that. I think too, though, the particular short stories that I was trying to publish, I realise now actually weren't really a collection. They were just a bunch of individual short stories. And to have a collection, I think it needs to be more coherent as an actual collection. It's not just a, I mean, I guess you have those short story collections by the really famous writers like Alice Munro or whatever that are like the collected stories of. And the idea of that is that they are all kind of all over the shop. But I think if you're going to publish a collection, like a debut, especially, you probably need to have a bit more coherence around the outcome of the book. Yeah, I didn't find it that disheartening because everyone was really encouraging to me and was like kept the doors open. I never had anyone sort of slam the door in my face.
And how did you reach out to those people?
Most of them contacted me through my website, and other ones, like, so I'd been published by Black Ink before with their old Best Australian Stories and Best Summer Stories, so I was in contact with editors there, and yeah, and I think emails, yeah, some people contacted me through my website and some people I asked to get in contact with, so I got like a reference from someone else I knew in the industry, and that kind of, sometimes when I was younger and I would hear stories like that, I would think, oh, that's really unfair, it's just nepotism and I don't know anyone. But the only reason I know anyone is from publishing and going through the slush piles of journals. So it was people like Rebecca Stafford at Killy Darlings and people at Black Ink and stuff who'd published my work. So it was all just from going through the slush pile originally.
Because you actually reached out to me too. I remember with that short story collection. And the reason I asked you that question is because, like, I always thought that that was actually quite a smart way to do it. It was through a friend of yours who knew me professionally, asking whether or not they could put us in contact, which I thought was, you know, like quite a nice way to do it. I do think that's a really professional approach to use someone who knows someone, because then it doesn't feel like you're kind of cold calling. Because I have to admit that when people email me directly, I can find that quite confronting at times, because I guess it feels like there's an assumption that I have limitless time and energy to read things. And because we actually have a manuscript submission process at Hachette where you can submit via our website or through prizes that we're affiliated with. So, you know, like, we already kind of have like a blind process that you can use, that when people contact me directly, it can be like I can find it a little bit off-putting. So I think that was a really smart way to do it. And you're right, it does feel a little bit kind of like there's a bit of nepotism involved there. But I guess the reason why that can feel more comforting for us is because we're normal human beings who have like kind of normal like emotions and have, you know, like that kind of comfort in kind of like familiarity that I think can make things a little bit easier sometimes. Having said that, I do also think that depending on the day that you get me, that actually I can think it's quite bold and exciting when people do email me directly. So that's the conflict, I guess.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Do either of you get people contacting you on like Instagram or Twitter or anything?
All the time.
Yeah. I don't usually respond, I have to say. Mind you, I have actually contacted some of my authors for the first time on Facebook or Instagram, which does feel a little stalky, but
I've done that too.
Like, yeah, I know, and it's kind of awkward, and I always have to lead with my, I know this is kind of creepy, but you know, it's actually worked out really well, you know, like it's, I mean, I remember that was how I contacted Nakia Louie like 5 years ago. I was like, I just saw your play. It was amazing. It was on Facebook Messenger. It was kind of embarrassing, but it was a bit of a fan letter. If you ever want to write a book, but yeah. But there are some that I just especially I don't know why Instagram messages just feels. I think because also I'm private on Instagram, so I don't know. I have to go into the allow things. I'm not very good at that stuff, but yeah, it feels a bit weird. Especially if there is a website. Like if there is we have a submissions portal on our Left Bank website. So there's sort of no reason to contact via, a personal Instagram. Yeah.
Sorry, Robert.
Sorry, I was just saying, I have to say that my preference would always be, if I read and am interested in someone's writing, to go and contact them via a website. So I think that what Allee said before about the conversation her and JP had about having a basic website is actually quite smart, because I don't really try to DM you on social media. I'd rather be able to go to your website and find some really interesting details about you. I don't think it's that expensive to set up a domain. I think it's quite cheap. I think there are lots of tools out there for setting up a really basic website that has your bio, some snippets of your writing, where you've been published, and a little kind of contact me email thing. I think it's actually quite easy to do that stuff. And I don't think it's kind of out of anybody's reach or particularly expensive to do so. There's lots of kind of really inexpensive ways to do that. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about how well designed an author's website is, but I do like how informative it can be. I do think to myself, if you've got all of that stuff there that I can see really easily, that's only going to help me decide whether or not I'm interested in approaching you. And I do that. I do go and go down by their websites. So it is I think a really helpful tool. And I think most young writers are very digitally savvy. I think most would be able to do that on their own and not have to fork out cash.
Just looking at this question, for someone with little to no connections to or in the publishing industry, how do you go about appropriately and respectfully contacting agents, editors, publishers with your work? Well, I think that's kind of similar to it's pretty much what we've been talking about, but yeah, I think it's tricky because I know a lot of agents have their books are closed, their submissions are closed, and often we will close them over the Christmas New Year period, just so we can kind of get caught up. But when we opened our submissions at Left Bank when we first started over a year ago, we were just flooded. It was pretty amazing. And there's so much to sort of go through and read. It is really important, I think, when you do those submission letters, to really sort of think about your elevator pitch as well. Really think about how you can give that short, sharp couple of lines that speak to your book. And I think that I have so many of my authors, when I say, oh look, can you put together a few lines, it is one of the hardest things to do. I think blurb writing is the hardest thing, don't you guys think?
Yeah, completely. I will say, we've just got a question about doing an elevator pitch, and I think that kind of ties into the idea of writing a blurb. And many years ago, a creative director of one of our UK publishing houses was talking to me about the ideal way to kind of put together a blurb, and I've always really appreciated it. She basically said to me, you should approach it as kind of writing a letter to your ideal reader. So it's basically as if you know this person intimately and the things that they like and the things that they don't like, basically convincing them that this book is for them. So when you're putting a pitch together like that, that's the way you should do it. You should effectively write it as a letter to begin.
Yeah.
Dear X, make up that person's name if that's the way you want it to be. I know that you really enjoy this kind of podcast and you watch this on TV and that you've read these kind of books. Let me tell you about this thing that I've been writing, which, in 3-4 sharp sentences is about this. I'd love to, share it with you and give you an opportunity to have a read of it. I think it's really quite simple. I believe that when you're writing like a pitch like that, or when you're delivering a pitch like that, they should be succinct and they should be like really to the point. But it is kind of hard, and I've delivered a few kind of for the Emerging Writers Festival a couple of years in a row now. I've done like a session about pitching, and it doesn't come naturally to everybody, particularly because you've worked on it for so long. You're really invested. You know the ins and outs of all of it. But what you almost need to do is become slightly removed from it and be like, what would make someone else want to read this, as opposed to why did I write it? So I don't know how helpful that was, but that's how I would approach it.
No, I think and I also think, like, Allee, I think how you've gone about it to get to this point in your career is kind of the ideal. Like, that's what I say to so many young writers is, submit to lit journals, get your work published, submit to prizes, like having those shortlistings. It'll also introduce you to the publishing space in that world and give you a real understanding. And it's also, as you were saying before, learning about rejection as well, because that, I think, is a really important element to take in, because it's brutal. I mean, you really could not pay me enough money to be a writer. Like, I have so much respect for anyone that can, I mean, writing a book it's a massive undertaking. It's huge. And, no matter what, it's an incredible achievement. And I don't want that to sound condescending, because it really is quite phenomenal that you can even, have that headspace to do it. I know I can't, and I wouldn't be able to. But I think dealing and learning with having your work being read, having it critiqued, having a writers group, I think, is really a great way to sort of open the door in that, because it is such a solitary thing. It is something that you do. It is an incredibly private world that you're in. So just even for the practicality of it, but also for mental health, it is sort of easing your way into this world, which can be, it's a hard one to navigate, I think, because I know when I pitch a book, and if a publisher doesn't love it, and it particularly is with fiction, I think, more so than nonfiction in some ways. I mean, memoir slightly different, but I feel so passionate about it that I feel mortally wounded when someone rejects one of the manuscripts that I've submitted. So, I can't even imagine. I know how hard that is for you guys too.
Yeah, I think I never, with the short fiction publishing in journals, I really love short fiction. I have so much fun writing it. And it was really, I didn't do it in this way, or maybe I did. I went to uni and they were like, you should publish stories in journals, and that's the first step. It's kind of like getting a writer's CV before you do the book. And I think it was always pitched in that way, because it really helps you get the attention of agents and publishers if you have this experience. And it wasn't until I started the structural edit that I realized the experience, that's not just a thing you do to signify to publishers. Like, it actually is experience that helps you then edit your novel. Like, I found like, I know how to use track changes, and I know how to respond to questions, and I know what it feels like to get an edit, and I know that sometimes your knee-jerk reaction is that that's not what to do, and then later you realize it is. Like, it actually was experience that's made the editorial process so much smoother, I think. So yeah, I would definitely recommend to young writers to get involved in journals and things like that.
I think have people, yeah.
Did you have somebody reading your work before you were submitting it? Like, were you have trusted friends or, you know, I guess writing colleagues that you were sharing stuff with?
Yes, because I studied creative writing, and 4 of us from my master's degree remained in a writers group for a couple of years after we finished our degree, which was great. Even if you're not, like, one of them is now an editor and not a literary editor, like editor of more formal stuff, but he still enjoys the writers group because he's like, I'm glad that this isn't a massive part of my life anymore. So even if you don't necessarily want to continue on with it, it was just a nice practice for all of us. But if people don't want to study too, I would really recommend going. I did an online short story workshop last year with Writers Victoria, which was run by Josephine Rowe. And I only really did it because I'm just a massive fangirl of her. Like, I sort of felt like I'd done my creative writing degree. But it was amazing. Like, we got 4 submissions and she wrote back a full response to every single submission, like a full page of feedback. And we all shared our work with each other. It was really good value for money. So I definitely recommend looking at your state writers centre and seeing if they have online courses, or they also often have links to workshopping groups, I think, as well. Because not everyone wants to do a creative writing degree, and they are really expensive. So there are other ways to find those networks. Yeah.
And also your writer centre opens you up to a community as well. Again, if you're feeling like you don't have that world built within, you know, your group anyway, that it will open that up. And often they'll offer seminars on, you know, how, like, pitching seminars as well, and it will just sort of give you a sort of entree card into that space so you can understand it. Because I think that's the biggest thing is learning to understand it and not, you know, it's not being scared of it either, you know, because I think it can seem just like this quite overwhelming space. But, you know, as Robert has said, like, we're all just, you know, regular people, you know, doing what we do.
I would also just say that I actively discourage you from entering prizes or submitting work that someone else hasn't read first, because I think that a prize judge or like an editor at a journal or a publisher is the person to test new work on. You're wrong. Like, the best way to do it is to get somebody who you trust, but also to be honest with you, to tell you what does and doesn't work with that piece of writing to begin with. And that person cannot be your mother. Like, they cannot be the person who's
so true.
You are. It needs to be someone that you actually trust to read that work. So that's why I think, you know, it's invaluable to have a writers group or a trusted writing friend, or, you know, even some of those state-based writing centres have opportunities for your work to be kind of like assessed, or someone to give you some critical feedback on. That's a better option than testing that new work on a journal or a publisher or an agent, because
so true.
Because you need that feedback first, because it's very, very unlikely, I think, that work is going to impress if someone else hasn't read it first.
And I think also, like, you have to remember that first read is really important. You'll never have that again. So when you're submitting, you want it to be the absolute, like, you want to get it into the best shape it can be, because you know, chances are, we may read it again, we may say, yes, there's promise, but you've got to really go away and work on it. But you're never going to get that same first read again. So it is really important to spend the time, you know, really getting it as tight as you can get it.
And so, Robert, because the long list for this year's Richell Prize was recently announced, and
the shortlist was announced on Monday.
Oh, exciting! So, do you, like, what were obviously you can't tell us who's on it, but when you read the submissions, like, what made a shortlisted piece become a shortlisted piece?
it'll be about, I mean, because for the Richell Prize, for example, which, just to go back over what that is, it's a developmental prize. So it's about providing 3 chapters of work and explaining what the rest of that work is going to look like effectively. So you don't have a finished manuscript when you're submitting it. So the things that stand out when you're judging a prize like that is how polished those 3 chapters look, how well thought out the synopsis and the chapter breakdown is, so that we understand where you plan to go with that work. You know, I think for any submission ever, if your first 3 chapters aren't interesting enough, no one reads past that anyway. So like for this one, you've only got to do that bit that everybody wants to read. So it's about making sure that bit is really polished. And I think the other thing I think about is like, what makes this work, not that I think you can really honestly say that every piece of writing is utterly unique, but I think what makes this feel like it has a special point of view, what makes this writing seem like this person actually has thought about what makes them stand out from the crowd and what's going to make this work stand out from the crowd. Because if you're just trying to duplicate something else that's out there or something else that you've read, I'll be able to tell. You know, like if you've really worked at trying to fit a specific niche and copy what popular or interesting, I'll be able to tell. You like your work should be unique to you, and you should have a reason why you're the person to write it. So there are things to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think we're almost at the time, unless there's any more questions that people would like to ask, or if either of you have any final closing comments.
Quick, you've got us now. If you've got a question, you should ask it.
Yeah, exactly. Do it. What else? I feel like, yeah, just trying to think of other, I don't know. It's hard. Look, I think you have to go into it with as much knowledge as you can get. I mean, there are so many resources, and like, I know I've said it before, but I just think, you know, really do your research, really kind of, and read and research, and like that is, it's just such an important element to it all, you know. It really is.
Definitely read other Australian writers and read Australian books. And read Australian books, because I think it is ridiculous to expect this industry to support you if you're not already supporting it. So you should be out there reading those Australian books, because that's what kind of makes it possible to make more Australian books. So
yeah. And it is your market, you know, this is your market. And I know everyone has aspirations to be published in the US and the UK, but you know, this is where you need to start. If you can't do it here, then chances are it's not going to travel either. So I think that's important. I've just seen one here saying that what are the traditional publishing contracts? What are the main things in a traditional publishing contract that an author should look for? That's a really tough question to ask quickly, to answer quickly. I will say that, and this is, I guess, where I'm spooking the agent, that, you know, I would say that an agent negotiated contract looks quite different to an author publisher direct contract. As an agent, we have boilerplates with all the major publishers and the smaller publishers as well. And that we have negotiated, essentially the boilerplate is a negotiated contract. So we don't have to go back and negotiate every single point with every contract. So it is solid, it is tight. We've gone and done that the hard yards, the sort of argy-bargy with publishers, going back and forth so that it can be the best terms that we can get. And so, you know, it's for an agent, we only really like selling ANZ rights, again, because we like to exploit rights, and I use exploit in the most positive sense, because then we, you know, will use our connections and our relationships that we've developed with agents in the US and UK, and our translation teams. So yeah, that's sort of one of the main things, is that we really we only like to sell the rights in Australia and New Zealand, and they are tied in together.
Would you say that was true of kids publishing though as well? Right.
Well, illustrated and kids, not so much. Usually it is world rights, and you know, Robert, you know this better than anyone, doing so many illustrated books, but the cost of putting together an illustrated book is, you know, it's a lot. And so therefore, you know, I think it's only fair that the publisher sees a little of the back end of that one too.
Yeah.
And then,
you know, some of it's about the risk that the publisher's taking on, isn't it, Grace? So it's about,
yeah, totally,
you know, what feels realistic from a publishing perspective, like how likely it is that book can be profitable if it's just the Australian market. So yeah, exactly. There's another question. Are there certain literary journals that really stand out on a writer's CV if they have been published in them? What do you think, Robert? I mean, I'll admit freely that I really like Kill Your Darlings, but that's because
I was going to say that too.
But there's, you know, like, to be honest, Australia's fairly rich with lots of different ones, and different publishers probably read different journals, but I read quite widely, and I think, you know, even if they don't read that particular piece in that particular literary journal, remember when I was talking about your website before and being able to kind of link to places you've been published, if you've got that website up and you're being published in different journals and there's a link to where I can find it and read it, it's really likely that I'll be clicking through those if I find a piece of yours that I liked or I hear about something that you've done. So being published broadly is actually not a bad thing, and I wouldn't probably be focused on any specific journal because, you know, I also don't love every piece in every journal. So it's kind of, it depends on where it is and what time and whether or not that's the thing that I wanted to read. So probably is your best bet.
I would just add to that, when I started publishing short fiction, there's sort of this like impetus to be like, okay, now the Lifted Brow have published me, and Killy Darlings have published me, and Black Ink have published me, now I want to get into Mianjin and Overland. But in my case, those two journals have consistently rejected me, and the other three have consistently supported me again and again and again and published me again and again and again. So I think that if someone is supporting you, you should keep accepting their support and keep publishing with them. You shouldn't think like, oh, now you're done, I've done you, I'll go.
Yeah, no.
Like, if you realize that it's just they like you fit well together, and maybe your work just doesn't fit in the other ones as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely don't feel obliged to give your work away for free, though.
No, that's a very good one to end on. Yeah, that is one thing I will say. If someone says, I'll publish your book, you just have to pay me $20,000. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Thanks so much, guys.
No worries.
No, thank you.
Even at a distance.
Enjoy your picnic today.
Thank you. Enjoy your freedom.
We're Survivor. Like, it's tough. Every time I speak to one of my authors in Melbourne, I feel terribly, terribly guilty. But enjoy the sunshine. And you're like your final stages of the edit too. That's so exciting.
We're getting there.
Robert.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.